It's a greeting, and as you saw, you put your hands up, you expose your heart. Heart's open, and it means more than hello. It means I celebrate your presence. So we celebrate your presence. Look around the room, find somebody to celebrate. Give them a giant Marami.
Maraho.
Good, you're almost to Rwanda. You're almost about an 18-hour flight away. You'll be there with us. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to our student presentations. This, as a teacher, is, I won't talk much because it's all about the students. And this is, as a teacher, really a bonus, a circle on my calendar, because to hear this remarkable country distilled through our students' eyes and hearts and souls is really amazing. And there's several of you in the room who have been to Rwanda. Raise your hands. Yes. All right. Eventually, this whole room, right? Get it. And I know that it's really an honor to have our president here with us today, President Conway Turner. If you guys have not seen her, give her a giant And she knows that she has an extended invitation, an open invitation for Rwanda, and I think that'll happen. Great, that's good to know. So you're going to hear a lot about Rwanda and their experiences. We were just there last month. Seems some ways yesterday and some ways 6 years ago. So 3 will go today. 1 went yesterday. 3 students will go today, and then 2 more on Thursday. And at the end of each presentation, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of our scholars, our citizens, and our heart-stretched souls. But I will give the floor to our first student. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce to you Molly Bader.
So before I begin my presentation, I was asked to give a little bit of background on the situation in Rwanda and why we go there and what their history is. So for those of you who don't know, in 1994 in the spring, Rwanda experienced a major genocide. This was caused by 2 different groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis, which, as many Americans sometimes think that this is because of an old tribal rift. Yes, rift. But however, this distinction did not exist until colonists came to Rwanda. The Tutsis were chosen to be Tutsi because they had more European features, even though you really can't tell. Tutsi people were often wealthier. They had they were in higher society. They were the upper class, and the Hutu majority was the lower class. So for many years this went on, and even after Rwanda became independent, this divide still existed, and a lot of the Hutu people felt that after being oppressed for so long, that the Tutsi deserved to have revenge. So they deserved to have revenge against the Tutsi. So genocide needs to be caused by a few different things. It needs to be funded, it needs to be supported by the government, and there needs to be a large group of people supporting it and doing it. So in 1994, all of the culminating stresses came together in the right way so that these people could be slaughtered. The Hutu extremists were a group of people who were trying to eliminate the Tutsi entirely. And in April 1994, in a span of 100 days, about 1 million people were killed. So, I think that covers it, basically.
Well done.
So, now to my presentation. So the theme that I settled on was detachment inhibits healing, and I will get into that in a little bit. But I first wanted to go to Rwanda when I first heard about the trip as a freshman, and I thought I was just coming to the theater department to learn how to be an actor, but I was wrong. So, so I very quickly became immersed in this world of social justice and the Anne Frank Project and using storytelling as a vehicle to help people and to change the world. So thankfully, my junior year, I was able to make it happen and all the pieces came together, so I was able to go. As I was preparing to go to Rwanda, I had a couple of realizations. My major realization that myself nor any of the people that I know really know anything about Africa at all. I had a lot of people, adults and people of my age group, tell me that I was going to get Ebola, even though it is 3,000 miles away from Rwanda. And it was very clear that those who had heard about Rwanda only knew it as the country that had had the genocide. So I felt sort of an obligation to come back with a different story to tell. So, I think my first realization that Africa was going to be very different happened when I was on the plane. So we had a very long 14-hour flight from Toronto to Ethiopia, then a shorter flight from Ethiopia to Rwanda that stopped in Uganda. So I was not seated next to my friends. I was initially a little bit sad about that, but through some stroke of luck, I ended up sitting next to a businessman from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which I'm sure all of you know is a place with a lot of conflict, a lot of war, a lot of violence right now. It's not a very good place to be. But this man reached out to me and was so excited to hear that I was a student from America who was coming to Africa for the first time. And it was such a genuine moment of human connection that he was just reaching for. In the United States, particularly on public transit, we don't really find that kind of thing. We don't reach out to one another. But he said to me, I don't know if you can, this is my art journal. This is a processing tool that I kept throughout my trip. I wrote down a quote he said. He said, "Africa has many problems. Life is very hard, but we try anyway." And I thought that was just the most beautiful introduction to Africa that I could possibly have. He gave me his email and his phone number in case I needed him or wanted to get in touch, and it was such a beautiful moment of noticing that this place is going to be different. So, we arrived in the beautiful city of Kigali, which is the capital city of Rwanda, and we were met with gorgeous weather, gorgeous scenery, buildings, and beautiful, beautiful, happy, smiling people. There were children who followed us while we took walks. Everywhere we went, people were so excited to talk to us. I remember we were going for a walk, and a group of people stopped their car to shake our hands and ask us if we needed a ride anywhere. It was incredible. We would just be walking or driving on our bus, and people would yell "Mzungu," which means white foreigner, which is not offensive, but we stand out, and they were really excited to talk to us. It was such an overwhelming sense of community and welcome. We don't really think about accepting tourists or foreigners that much into America, even though we are supposed to be a melting pot. How often do you hear about people really disliking people from other countries or not wanting immigrants to come in? But in Rwanda, I've lived in the United States all my life, and I have never felt so welcomed as I did in this place where I do not live. This right here is one of our tour guides. His name is Eric, and he is one of the happiest, silliest, friendliest people I have ever met, particularly for a Rwandan. He's ridiculous. So, experiencing all of this joy as soon as we got here, it was kind of difficult for me to reconcile the fact that this incredibly beautiful, vibrant, happy place was a place where just almost 21 years ago, so many tragedies occurred. So we went to our first genocide memorial, which was Gisozi, and it is in Kigali. And this is more of a traditional museum-type approach. And here's a page of my art journal from this. Can you see it? It's okay. Okay. Yeah. All right. So in Gisozi, I was not sure what to expect. I was a little bit frightened. I have a quote that Drew said, which is, "It's okay to feel awful. It's okay to feel joyful. It's okay to feel nothing." And I wrote, "So far I feel awful." It was overwhelming. Outside, there were giant concrete slabs, which were mass graves where 300,000 people had been buried. But walking around them, you heard birds singing, and there were beautiful flowers. I taped some in my book. And it was so hard to really fathom the enormity of the loss that had happened there. I drew a little picture of Eric while he was talking to Drew. Eric, this happy, friendly person, was only 10 years old in 1994 when this happened. And he actually, his family had left Rwanda and came back after. And at 10 years old, he helped to dig up bodies and exhume mass graves because people who had lost relatives couldn't bear to do it themselves. And he's such an incredibly happy person today. So I was wrestling with this the entire time I was there. Something really incredible about this museum is they have a room that is filled with photographs, family photographs. Often in America, when we see museums or memorials for war, things like that, it's names on a wall or something similar. But this was my first sort of intro to how Rwanda really deals with the individuality of loss. These were family photographs, people smiling, laughing, weddings, birthdays, families hugging one another, and they were just little pictures that you would have printed out on your own, and they were on like clotheslines with little clips. There was no glass, nothing. And if you knew somebody in a photograph, you could take the picture. There was one letter that the niece of 2 people who had been killed had left for them, and she wrote, I don't think you can read it, but she wrote, "We will keep remembering you." So looking through this giant room of photos, I felt really connected to the people who they had been in their lives, and I was beginning to realize, I drew several of them, I wish I had time to draw all of them, but I drew several of them, and just spending this time looking at these people, I felt like I began to understand the individual losses that happened. There's a quote, I actually don't know if I have it on, I think I have it on another page, but there was a quote in the museum that said something along the lines of, "Genocide is not an act of murder, it is millions of acts of murder," over and over again. So that was really interesting to me. There was a room in Gisozi that was called the Children's Room, which was to honor different children, individual children of the genocide who had been killed. They couldn't do all of them, so they shined a light on a few. This had pictures of them, and as you can see, I don't think you can read that one, it has some facts about them, their age, and the way they were killed. This one says age 4, favorite food cake, favorite drink milk, she enjoyed singing and dancing, she was a neat little girl, and she was stabbed in her eyes and head. This room shocked me, it appalled me, it moved me, I was crying the whole time. There was a baby who was killed with a machete in his mother's arms. There were children who were killed with a grenade thrown into their shower. And one in particular that stood out to me was a 2-year-old who had been smashed against a wall. It was enormous and it was staggering, but I felt so connected to what had happened that it was really, I think, the right way to memorialize these people. So this is something that I drew in response to, particularly in the children's room. I have a quote from Anne Frank that we use in our play, telling people about Anne Frank in Rwanda, which is, "I long to ride a bike, to dance, whistle, look at the world, feel young, and know that I am free. And yet I can't let it show." I was imagining what it must be like to be a child during a genocide and also in this world coming out of a genocide, and trying to reconcile with that, with the innocence right among all of the terrors that had happened. Something that really struck me about the children's room is that I was born about a week before the genocide started. The only thing that keeps me from being one of those people is because I just happened to be born somewhere else. And that's really a lot to think about. So I was wrestling with this juxtaposition as we went on, and the next genocide memorial we went to was Nyamata Church. And Nyamata is unique in the fact that it is not a museum, it is a place where people were killed. So this church, in a prior conflict in 1992, had been used to house people who were hiding. And at that point in time, the perpetrators, they respected the fact that it was a place of worship, and they didn't go in to harm them. That's what people thought would happen this time around, but it didn't. So many, many people were hidden in this church, and we went into it. And there was a lot of evidence of the things that had happened there. Going in, you see in the cement floor the holes where the grenades had blown the doors open. There were bullet holes in the ceiling. There was a statue of the Virgin Mary that had been shot at. And on the pews, the pews were lined with people's clothing. Not just victims from this particular place, but many victims of the genocide. Their clothing was on the pews. I remember in particular images that stood out to me. There was a little pink flip-flop, and there was a tiny little shirt that had a cartoon character on it. And I kept thinking about the kids that I had seen day to day who would wave at us and walk with us, and the kids that I know in my own life. And it was really hard to deal with. So here are a few pictures. Then we had the wonderful opportunity of meeting this man. I don't know if you can see him that well in the picture, but the man in the sweater vest is a pastor. He did not speak English, so his friend translated from Kinyarwanda, but he was so adamant about telling us his story. It was like he had been waiting for us. And this man had lost both of his parents, his wife, and all 4 of his children, all of whom were under the age of 5. It was so much to imagine, and yet this man just emanated peace and stability. And now he's a pastor, and he may have been a pastor then, I actually don't know. But he has a new family, but he told us that in his congregation he preaches about peace. If there's peace in the world, this sort of thing will never happen again to anyone. And it was really hard to imagine how somebody could heal in that way and come back to the place where it had happened, even, and be okay with it. This particular memorial had something really interesting to me, and here's my page from that journal. There were mass graves outside, again, that's common in genocide memorials, and two of the crypts where people had been laid to rest properly, we were allowed to go down into. This made me really, really nervous. I had a lot of anxiety about it, but I felt like I'm here, and I should just do this. So I went down into the first one, and it's down the ground, and it's very narrow. It smells kind of musty, and there's some sunlight coming in from a window, but it was dark, and the walls were lined with coffins. And this particular crypt made me really, really anxious and uncomfortable. And I was down there, and I was actually kind of annoyed with myself that I felt so uncomfortable and scared, because I was thinking, like, I need to respect what happened, I need to experience it, I need to calm down, these things can't hurt me. But you know how, these images of coffins and things like that, they frighten us. So I couldn't wait to get out of there. And the next one I was hesitant to go down into because I knew that this one did not have coffins. This had bones and skulls. So when I finally went down, I was really interested to notice how different my response was. I would have thought that that would have bothered me more, but the fact that I could see the skulls laid out in rows, still the same narrow passageway, and I could look at them, and they had bullet holes, and they had gashes where machetes had chopped into them, and some of them were smashed, and some were babies. But even though that was so painful and so much to work through, and I was weeping, and I was able to take my time and be with the reality of what had happened instead of hiding from it. And that, I think, stood out to me as really one of the main reasons why Rwanda has come so far since what happened in 1994. After this happened, people really had so much that hiding it, especially something that had happened to everybody, it wasn't really an option. In America, when we deal with tragedies, we mostly deal with them by putting them away. We don't process things as a community. We often don't even process things individually because it's not how we're brought up. We're brought up to hide anger and sadness and depression and fear and anything negative, just pretend it doesn't exist. But that isn't what happened in Rwanda, and I felt so strongly being down in that crypt that I was beginning to understand how they were able to do what they've done. So this next photo is not a picture of the crypt, but it is a picture of some bones that had been exhumed that were being dried out in the church. So look at this, try not to put it away. This was in the upper level of the church itself, not outside in the crypt. So people will keep on finding more bones because not everyone knew where everybody was buried, so these discoveries keep on being made. So the church dries them out and cleans them and then buries them properly. So that was a lot to sort of deal with, but I really appreciated the way that they were doing it. So the next genocide memorial we went to was Marami. And Marami was a school that was being built. And I was really, really nervous, again, to go to Marami because this had real bodies that had been preserved. So they had been exhumed from a mass grave and they had been preserved in lime. In these classroom buildings, they were all laid out on tables, and I felt a lot of anxiety about it. I wasn't sure how I would handle it. These bodies, it had like a musty smell from the lime. They had hair, some of them, bits of hair. There were mothers holding babies, there were children. And it was so much to deal with, but I felt good about the fact that I could be there with the pain and the tragedy and what had happened. And I think that if this particular memorial where people had been killed if they had been names on a wall or numbers, statistics, I wouldn't have really been able to understand it. And I'm glad that I could. As you can see from my little drawing of hills, everywhere in Rwanda is called the Land of a Thousand Hills. It's got beautiful, lush greenery everywhere. And so this horrible place where we're seeing all these bodies was surrounded by so much beauty. And as we walked in even, there was a fence where the property ended and houses were on the other side. There were children laughing and waving at us, Mzungu, all that stuff. And so it's just such a balance of joy and tragedy, and such a clear picture of how even when terrible things happen, if you acknowledge them and you deal with them, you can keep moving forward. So while we were at Marami, in typical Rwanda fashion, because it rains a lot, or at least it did while we were there, a giant thunderstorm hit, and I just have this picture that Sam took of me running out in the rain, right after seeing all these horrible things. That's my art journal, actually. For those of you who don't know, watercolor pencil is like colored pencils that you draw with, and then when you get it wet, it's like watercolor paint. So I tried to run out in the rain, and actually it was much too wet, it didn't work, but I had a lot of fun. So joy can exist in the same place as suffering if you just accept what has happened. So here's my last picture. This is a picture of us and some people from a refugee camp that we visited. And I'd like to end this with a quote from Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh. He has a wonderful quote that is, "What you don't transform, you transmit." And this means that whatever suffering you have in your life, if you do not work through it and deal with it and transform it into something else, it never really goes away. It will be passed on to your children, to the people around you. It will continue to manifest in different ways until someone can transform it into something new. And that's really what I think the message of Rwanda is. These people have really transformed their suffering, and because of that, they've been able to come out of the ashes, and they're in a beautiful, peaceful place now. Thank you.
See why I'm proud of them. Great stuff, Paul. So do you have any, well, Rob, why don't you switch, get your computer ready while people ask some questions. Does anybody have any questions for Molly?
Did you ever check in with the manument on the plane?
Honestly, no. I've been meaning to, but I just keep forgetting. I should today, later. Be like, hey, I did a presentation about you. Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of times a proper burial. What is considered a proper burial in Rwanda?
Rwanda is a very Christian nation, so those who found bodies, particularly bodies that were mostly intact, proper coffins, buried in either crypts or in proper individual graves.
Christian burial.
If you had one thing to say to anyone that was going to experience this in the future or wanted to, what would that one sentence be? To summarize.
Be open. I didn't know what was going to happen, and I just tried every day to let it happen to me and see what happened because of that. So yeah.
You're a theater major, but you have this artistic journal.
Yes.
And I was wondering if the art was a lens through which you could look.
Yes.
And sort of, and that allowed you to deal with things.
Yes. I am a theater major. I have a minor in painting. I actually almost did a double major, but I wanted to graduate on time. So art is a really big part of my life, as well as theater. I found that they overlap in many, many ways. It's all about expression and honesty and things of that kind. So the art journal, this was actually my first time making an art journal. I knew I wanted to as a research method. But it really helped me every day because I often find that even when I can put words to something, if I'm struggling with something enormous, sometimes it's better for me to draw a picture about it. And that's a really good tool for me, at least, for emotional response and processing through that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Yes? Yeah.
Did you see any art from Rwanda while you were there?
Yes, I did. It was amazing. So in our youth hostel where we stayed, there was a lot of beautiful artwork that was hanging on the walls that had been made by Rwandans, and we also had the wonderful gift of being able to visit a place called the Inema Art Center, which was an art center that these people owned, where they did their own work, but they also sold work by artists in the community and by children who, is that right? Children who got lessons there?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So very vibrant, lots of different styles. There's abstract, there's more traditional. It was really, really cool. That excited me a lot. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank you.
Their assignment, just so you know, because it's such an enormous 3 weeks, is to find the one or two things that really surfaced as important to them. If they told you everything that they did, you would be here for several weeks. And it's also part of the job of the storyteller to take enormous events and condense, find the themes, find the essence. It's what we do in this building all the time, right? Using stories to unpack huge events. So, without further ado, let me introduce to you Robert Sherman.
So, as you said, while we were in Rwanda, the 8 of us, he kept on kind of prying at us, not prying, gently prying, to continuously think about what an overarching theme personally and individually each of us found during our experience. And while in Rwanda, as Drew said, we experienced so much in such a short period of time, and I found so much contrast and opposition with so many elements of not only Rwandan culture, but of things we had experienced at museums, and I kept on thinking to myself, how do these things go together? And my presentation is called Life is Balance, an Exploration of Opposition and Unity. So throughout the trip, well, actually first, let's begin with, where is Rwanda? Give it a second to load. So Rwanda is located on the eastern kind of, not coast, but central side of Africa. It's right next to the DRC. And it's really known for its great coffee, which I see Dr. Cornwitcher has some of. I used to just come back to the hostel and smell it because it's just so wonderful. Right, it's great. You should pass it around. It's also known for its wonderful tea exports, and I'm sure most of us know it for the 1994 genocide, where more than 1 million people were hacked and slaughtered to death in 100 days. Words don't even begin to tell the magnitude of that pain and suffering. So this is a picture, actually, of Busozi. The mass graves that Molly talked about are here, these concrete slabs on the ground, and then Ashley and Rebecca in the background. And I found such a contrast while at this museum, memorial of content and environment. It was really difficult and beautiful to know that 30,000 people were buried on these grounds, and to see their remains actually in an exhibit. Molly talked about a room full of pictures. There was also a room full of clothing that had been exhumed from the victims, as well as skulls. And that was very challenging to take in. But also being surrounded by this beautiful landscape, and as Molly said, hearing people laugh, and there was always birds singing. It was absolutely gorgeous, and I found myself like struggling, like what to feel, because one second you would be looking at skulls, and then you come outside and it's like, honestly, the best way I can describe it, the second day we arrived in Rwanda, I woke up and I looked outside and it was like Dorothy stepping into Oz. It really, honestly, the color of everything was just so beautiful and vibrant, from this kind of like hazy, sleepy, drone kind of existence that I had become on the plane for 14 hours. But really difficult to kind of balance with the, like I said, content and the environment in which it is exhibited. While in Rwanda, we also visited a Tige camp, which is a prison, but not in the traditional sense that we Americans think of a prison. We think of individual cells and really a lot of angst and violence in prisons. But at this Tige camp, these individuals were genocide perpetrators who had slaughtered, some even sexually violating the victims beforehand. And they had confessed their crimes and asked for forgiveness. So this picture is actually of all of the men pictured in the blue are these not individuals, but yeah, working individuals at this camp who had asked for forgiveness and now work at this camp where the city that they actually almost destroyed, Kigali, and the country that they almost destroyed, they now help rebuild by making bricks. And it's really interesting. I was telling my mom about this on the way back, and she almost died. I told her that when I first got there, when we all first got there, it was really difficult to kind of stand in front of them and look into their eyes. I found myself looking down a lot and not really trying to disconnect myself, like Molly said previously, from the weight of what these men had done. But eventually things started to ease up and we started to really have conversations with them about what they experienced and what lessons they took from the genocide and what they would give to further generations. And then we performed for them and they actually danced with us, and we were dancing in the rain. It was pouring, like Molly said. This was another day that it was pouring. And it was just once again, the juxtaposition of what these men had done and where they are now, and the joy that they can experience, and the magnitude of violence that can also come. It really made me think to myself that we are truly all capable of what these gentlemen did. We all have it inside of us. It's part of human nature. Yeah, it was very difficult to wrestle with, and still is for me. This next picture is a picture of a wildlife preserve that we actually took a safari at. There's probably crocodiles and hippos in the background. I think that's actually Tanzania over on the other side of that. But we are on Rwandan soil, so while looking at this photo, it actually perfectly summarizes my favorite part of my journey to Rwanda, which was the beauty and majesty of the physical landscape and the natural environment in which they are so blessed to live. But while I was there, while we were taking city tours and while we were visiting different institutes and memorials and things of that nature, there was a lot of talk on the bus to and from about how Rwanda's developing and the rapid growth of the city of Kigali. There's buildings going up left and right. Drew and Eve actually talked about how just in 1 year's time, how much has been created already. And I thought to myself, a word that was used a lot was development. And I really challenged that in my mind. What is development? Because the beautiful natural environment in which they live, that has to be sort of stripped in order to build these new buildings and conference halls and hotels, to start revenuing foreign currencies and building up the Rwandan economy. And I found, once again, an extreme juxtaposition between what is and what is becoming. This next photo is a side photo of Kigali. Not every city is as densely populated. This is actually the capital of Rwanda, so it's very densely populated. And as Vali said, it's the land of 1,000 hills, so everything's on a hill. But once again, just going back to this photo and this photo, I just see so much change, and it really worries me, the notion of development and bringing in new buildings, and it's a really fine line and delicate balance doing so, because how would Rwanda still maintain the beauty of its environment? As you can see, there are still trees all over the place. Like Drew and Eve said, new buildings are going up left and right. How do we preserve what's already there and make use of that? So, overall, this is a photo I took on the safari, which I think just summarizes Rwanda perfectly. I think overall, my trip was, and still is, very challenging to wrestle with the opposition of kind of light and dark, and that's why I said life is balance, because in Rwanda there's so much poverty and such a weighty history, but such beauty and such growth and wonder that it really leaves you with a sense that life is beautiful. So, that's it.
Any questions for Rob? See why we only do 3 at a time, right? That's a lot.
It's a lot. I have a question.
Yeah.
Has your definition of beauty changed since going?
Yes and no. I don't think it's changed. I think it's been refined. I've always felt a connection to nature, and Rwanda is obviously very rich in environment and beauty. So I think just refined. Yeah.
Yes.
Were you able to speak with the gentlemen at the camp and ask them, at some point you said it was hard to make eye contact, but did you ask them about their experience having committed genocide at all?
Sort of. We didn't really do the talking. Carl did,
Okay.
who was the gentleman that we traveled with. He was actually the only American citizen to stay in Rwanda during the genocide. But he talked with them about the notion of responsibility, because a lot of the individuals at the Tej camp said they took responsibility and had confessed what they had done, but they also kind of balanced the blame with the government, because the government kept on telling the Hutu citizens that this is your duty to civic law, like we need to exterminate these peoples. So they really talked about that. And one, obviously, overarching thing that they talked about was how for future generations this shouldn't happen anywhere else in the world, and to share the story that we had learned in Rwanda with the rest of the global community.
Could you talk about how you prepared yourself for what you were going to see there, and did you feel prepared? No.
To be honest, I didn't really have per se a ritual or anything. I kind of just woke up and went with it. Like Molly said, the best advice for anyone going is definitely be open, and every day I knew was a new experience. Drew and Eve on the bus, the traveling to these different venues, I guess you could say, always told us gave us kind of a rundown without really trying to force their perspective onto us. So we were really allowed to take on our own journey, and it was very helpful.
Once their applications are accepted, we spend once a week for about 5 weeks talking about things like shots and preparation. But there's no adjectives I have found that we can give that prepare them enough. I tell them, be prepared every day to have your heart filled and broken, which is good stuff. That's why we go to school. And we talk a lot and we process through. They're with us now. I'm with them now in a class where we're devising a play based on that experience. One, it helps us to keep an eye on each other. It's not an easy reentry. And two, we're processing through what we know, which is storytelling. So that will be the play that we tour in the fall, Buffalo Public Schools, which we have reservations for, but we don't know what it's about yet. So that's pretty cool.
I was wondering how...
Everybody, that's Eve Everett. She's the assistant director of the Manfred.
Hi. Hola. Rob, since you've been back, it's been about a month or so now, what's balance like in your life now? What does that mean to you? How have you, if you can sum it up, since you've been to Rwanda and you saw the balance there, how did you bring that balance back here, and how has it affected you?
I'm still kind of in a place of imbalance.
Okay.
So, trying to get my life together, I guess you could say, in my last semester. Every time I get really, really stressed out, I just remember that morning waking up and seeing Rwanda the second day, and just the feeling of everything is going to be all right. It's okay.
Okay, yeah, okay, cool. Awesome. That's a great lesson.
Jared?
You talked about forgiveness, especially in regards to the men at the prison. Do you feel like that's the social climate of Rwanda itself towards those people in the prison? Do you feel as if all is forgiven, or do you feel like is there grudges? Is there anger? Is there misunderstanding?
It's really hard to generalize an entire population.
Yeah.
But overall, everyone that we had spoken with talked about they have been forgiven. I think Drew spoke with one woman at the hostel who worked there, and showed her a video of us dancing with the prisoners, and she's like, they're forgiven. This is the new them.
And she was somebody who watched her whole family be exterminated in '94. She was adamant about that's enough punishment for them. It's hard for us
Yeah, it is.
to imagine with Western ideas and Western morals that this level of forgiveness exists. Yeah, I hear I've been there a lot, and I also have the same, I want to be Rwandan when I grow up.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you're a theater major too.
I am. I'm actually a double major in music and theater.
This is kind of a question then for Molly and you. Molly, you said that you came, to study to be an actor. There's a lot of technical aspects of that I'm sure you learned. Where does this fit into how it would inform your career as an actor or in theater? When you leave the campus to go on with your life, what did this do for you, besides just being a good actor?
Got it. Well, first of all, great question, thank you. The best thing I can say about this experience is it teaches you to be human. And that's all acting is. Excuse me, is portraying human nature in a heightened sense, metaphorically or realistically, whatever the venue may be. And I think the trip to Rwanda definitely, Drew talks about it a lot, stretched my heart. Because, as he said, it's filled and broken at the same time. It's astonishing how much you can actually take. But yeah, that's definitely how I will transition into the work.
Did you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
Okay. I really agree with what Rob said about teaching you to be human. I love that. What I think is so important in being an actor, also like being a person, is really knowing how to be in touch with everything about you, everything about your experience. Like in my presentation, talking about being in touch with the pain that you experience, and that's so important as an actor because we're not pretending. Like something we always say is, "What if this were me? What if this were who I am in this situation, in these circumstances?" And it really, I think, helps me to become comfortable with that. Especially after some of the places we performed in a refugee camp, and we performed in a teach camp for genocide criminals, and all of these places where these people, there was no ego about it. It was just, we had a story that people needed to hear, and that was really incredible. Yeah.
Thank you, Rob. That was true. Rob talked about the beauty quite a bit, and there's a saying over the entire continent of Africa that goes something like this, that God spends his days all over the world, but he sleeps in Rwanda. And when you land, you say, "Oh, God's no dummy." So, last but not least, it's my honor to introduce you to Sam Merriman.
So, for a big challenge for me, as Drew kept telling me, I had to step out of my shell and become Rwanda Sam, where I was loud and I was present and always. And the moment that really happened was we were in a refugee camp, and we were trying to get on the bus, and you have like 60 kids climbing all over you. I was walking like this, people hanging on my arms, trying to get back on the bus. And the way I got them out is I yelled out a phrase. And I'd like you to yell back after I, okay? So, Waramutse!
Waramutse!
Thank you. And it means good morning or new beginning. And I think after coming back, it is a new beginning for me. So my presentation is called Captain's Findings, Smiles Create Forgiveness. Now, if anyone was following my blogs, which kind of petered out after my laptop died in Rwanda, they were based off of, they're referencing Star Trek. And the reason I did that was because both my parents are Trekkies. And they kept telling me, "Sam, you're going to die, we're never going to see you again. You can't go." And I said, "I have to go." And I promised them I wouldn't become a red shirt. And a red shirt is the people who always die in the episodes. So I didn't, I'm alive, I'm back, and it was a great experience. So right when we first got there, the hostel set up a nice, beautiful dinner for us, and we were greeted by GEI, Global Education Institute, and they were already smiling and welcoming us. I walked off the plane with all my luggage, tired, and then all of a sudden I see this man named Eric come over, and he said, "Brother," and hugged me. And I said, "Hello, nice to meet you too." And it was just so different than how it is around here. And I didn't really travel a lot. This is really the only time I've ever been out of the country besides Canada. And so it was a really big change for me. But I don't regret it. And just the generosity. And the one thing I kept seeing as we explored the city, Carl gave us a tour on the first or second day there, and he was going, "Oh, this has happened there, this happened here," and you're just walking around like, "Oh, okay, wow, okay, huh?" And the one thing I noticed was everyone was smiling. They were conscious of each other. People weren't just bumping into each other, pushing us off. They were all present with themselves and they were happy. And that really baffled me because 20 years ago they just had a mass genocide and I still hold resentment on my middle school bully, and I don't know how they would forgive that easily. And it was something that kept going through the trip, and as we kept making more bonds, this is our bus driver Gaga, and he had one of the best smiles there, and he was a great guy. He got us up a slippery slope of hill, and at the teach camp it was raining and our bus got stuck, and he got us out, and he was just always greeted you in the morning, remembered your names, every story you told him he remembered, and he was a great guy. And Yvonne is our other tour guide, and he was great. He called me his nephew. And when we were in a ZZ Life, which we were doing a day in a village, day in the life of the villages there, they kept asking me, the villagers, if I was taken. And he kept telling them no, and he kept trying to have me married off so I would have to come back and live there. I said, Yvonne, I can't right now. I'll come back, I promise. And he said, you better. And it's great because our other tour guide, Eric, and Yvonne still talk to me over WhatsApp. So they still check in and ask him how they're doing. Yvonne just got married before we just got there. And the running joke of the trip was, Yvonne, do you have any kids yet? Because in Rwanda, having kids is a big thing. So that's a little game we play. And then we got to our third genocide memorial at Marami. And this was actually a school being built at the time. And the Tutsis were told to go there. And they did, and they thought they'd be safe. They actually stopped an attack on them twice or 3 times. And then finally, the Hutu cut off their water and food supply, and they got weak, and they were able to they came in and killed pretty much everyone. And we were walking through this, and there were rooms where there were bodies encased in lime, and there were rooms I just couldn't enter. I got to the doorway, and like the death just hit me. It stalled me. I just couldn't push through and get in there. And it really was, there was no chance of smiling. And I didn't feel like I was in Rwanda when I was there. I felt I was like sucked up into like the outer space, and this was just some place. And as we were continuing the tour, we saw a placard, and it says, this is where the French played volleyball, right next to this mass grave, like 100 feet away. Because the French came in and they retook the school, but they were also on the side of the Hutu. And they were flip-flopping sides, depending on who was winning at the time. And I couldn't imagine how people forgave this. It still didn't get to me. It still didn't make any sense. It's just another, it's like right on the front desk. But I had a conversation with Eric. And Eric, as Molly said, was this great guy who came back when he was 10. He has like the biggest smile, and just whenever you're around him, you can't stop but being happy. And it's great. And something Eric told me was, I asked him, how can you forgive everyone? And he said, it's easier to smile, and when you smile, you let go, and you are able to move on. And that was a chord that stuck with me throughout the whole trip. And just him showing that, and then as I thought about it more, he's passing along his smile to everyone else, and then they're passing their smile along, and it creates this whole vibe of forgiveness. Another example of smiling, creating forgiveness, and being able to be happy after something tragic happening is Carl brought his friend Fodidas over. And Fodidas is now a doctor. He's very successful. And when he was in Rwanda during the genocide, he saw countless people being killed, his family, and he was hiding in his friend's house. And his friend was Hutu, and there was a group of Hutus coming in, and his friend's parents said, you have to send your friend away. He's like a son to me, but we can't have him here. And he started to walk down the road, and he got to a road block, and he saw a woman being killed. And he said, no, I can't make it. And he walked back to the house and he said, "You can't stay here, but we have land, go hide in the bush." And he did. They were bringing him food, but eventually he was captured. And a group of Hutus with 2 other men, they told him to dig to his own grave. And he dug his grave and he was talking to them. And then they realized, no. One spoke up and said, "We shouldn't kill them here because this is our farmland, it will destroy our crops. Let's take him to the highway." So they brought him out of the hole, took him to the highway, and then he started to dig his own grave. And this time he started talking to them more. And he was telling them stories about his life. And when he did that, they decided, we can't kill this man. So they started to hide him. And he survived through the genocide. And when he came to talk to us, something he said was, "Some days I don't remember the genocide even happened." And I was blown back. I was sitting down, felt like I was being shoved back into the couch because how heavy that statement was. It just didn't make any sense. How could you not forget that? How can you not just live in complete, utter remembrance of that? And then he said he only remembers that happens is when there's a birthday of a loved one that's not there, or an anniversary. But he said he was able to get past it because of the generosity of everyone else around him. And that creates the smile. The smile is a big aspect in Rwanda. I don't think I've ever saw anyone, even if they were having a bad day, they still had a genuine smile. And I think that is the greatest thing we can actually learn from them. Because here, we're always to ourselves. If we're having a bad day, your head's down, you're walking to school, you're powering through the snow, and you don't care about anyone. Even if they're having a bad day, they pass on their smile. And this is our second memorial we went to. As Molly said, Damata. It was a church where everyone was killed. And I couldn't get down this yet. I got down the first step, and again, the smell of death, muskiness, just weighed down my shoulders, prevented my legs from moving forward. I felt like I was being watched, and I had to step out. I had to run back up the stairs. And when I came up the stairs after going down, I heard humming of a really beautiful song. And I was really like, who the hell could be humming like this? This is how disrespectful. And we come to the man in the sweater vest. And he's a pastor, as Molly said. And when we started to hear a story, he started to talk about his family, his kids that were killed. And he was actually hiding in the forest as this was happening, and he was trying to bring people over to the church. And he was able to save a few of them and send them back to safety. And he just lives in his past, in his village. He preaches forgiveness. People who have done crimes against him have come to him and asked for his forgiveness, and he says, "Of course." And he smiles at them, and he blesses them, and he says a prayer for them. And again, that just shows the power of a smile. Although Rwandan smiles are really big, it doesn't have to be the biggest smile. Just one inkling of caring or respect for another human being can change someone's attitude or someone's day completely. And I personally, this is one of my favorite pictures I took. It's Rob and Molly recreating the iconic Titanic scene in a Jeep. And we're getting our African massages, and they're called African massages because the roads are so bad you're just jumping all over the Jeep. And they're doing this, and it just shows how free this Rwanda can be, and how someone can be when they're truly experiencing happiness, and just how big the smiles are.
That's our shirt
Oh,
says
my
smile.
shirt says smiles.
Is it really?
Yeah, it does.
And as we moved on through the trip, I was able to think more of my theme, and I realized how important it was to forgive. And doing that makes smiling easier, because you're not holding on. It's actually easier to smile than it is to frown. So why not do that? And this is the pictures Yvonne took of us at Easy Life. we were chopping grass. Rebecca, Molly, and I were in one group. This is where I was trying to get pawned off by Yvonne. So my final message to all of you is just keep passing on the smile. It's our job now to do that, and I think we all can. And thank you.
Any questions for our smiling man?
So you guys did a performance?
Yes.
What were you doing?
We did Anne Frank in Rwanda. It was a piece Eve put together from passages of the Diary of Anne Frank. And we each were given a role of Anne, and we were able to pass that on.
There is some Kinyarwanda music, songs moved through, so it's about 10-15 minutes that we were, in Africa when you come, they dance and sing for you. And the first year, they would dance and sing, and then they looked at us and I said,
Uh-oh.
here's a bracelet. So now they bring something to give back.
Yeah.
The way you say hello in Africa, you perform back. So all these, that's what that performance is. Thanks for asking me about that. Dee?
Sam,
Yes.
if, hypothetically speaking, if you were to go back to Rwanda, do you think you would go into the rooms at Marami or go into...
Yes, I would. I think I would be able to this time. I just think the shock of it
Right.
was a little bit too hard.
So then why do you think you would in the future?
Because I've grown since then. Just having the whole 3 weeks there really helped me get out of my shell and become more than just inside me. So I was able to experience more now.
I was curious about the story that the man told that saved his life and changed his captors' minds. Did he go into that at all?
Yes, he was reciting Bible verses, and they realized that what they were doing was wrong. And
He humanized himself. He humanized himself. Like every genocide, the perpetrators will dehumanize the victims, right? The Jews were rats in the Holocaust. The Tutsis were cockroaches. And he started talking to them. He was very clever. But he made himself three-dimensional in front of them. So they once he became human, they refused to kill him. He wasn't a cockroach.
Sounds interesting. It sounds like you became more human too during your trip, you know, in growth into who you really are. Yeah. Or who you really could be. Yeah. Great.
But you can't stop smiling.
I know. What's the government like now in Rwanda?
it's
What's going on?
very, very stable. Actually, President Kagame didn't kick out all the Hutus. There's actually the general in charge of the Hutu army is now in charge of the prison system. And now he's controlling the same men, but just differently. And he was forgiven. He asked for forgiveness of the country first, and then was granted the position.
10,000 Hills is a really great book to read by Stephen Kinzer. I can share that with you if you want, as he talks about Kagame's rise to power. Kagame, sometimes through Western years, Africa's not given a full experience, a full choice. What Kagame has done there, to me, is nothing short of a miracle. It's an amazing. Rwanda is the most densely packed country, as Molly had mentioned, in Africa. It's teeny, it's the size of Vermont. But his choice, because he took advantage, and he does this, the opportunity of genocide has given them the opportunity to start clean, go back to pre-colonial Africa, pre-colonial Rwanda. He says quite consistently, we got ourselves into this mess, Rwandans will get ourselves out. So he refuses to have that hand out to the West to supply everything, because there's lots of strings attached.
Yeah.
So they're doing well by Western standards. Some people have questions about his form of democracy. I too have questions about every country's form of democracy. It's a work in progress, ours included. Well, Kate, do you want to say something?
I just have a question. Did you have a chance to talk to many children while you were there? And if so,